A biker gang storms into a small-town diner on a cold Tennessee night. Their leader, a man everyone fears, sits down, hungry, hollow, and angry at the world. But when a trembling waitress whispers, "May I have your leftovers?" everything stops. She isn't begging for herself. She's saving scraps to feed her sick mother and little brother. And in that one moment, something cracks open inside him. Something he thought was gone forever. What begins as a single act of kindness turns into a battle for his soul, as his violent past hunts him down, and the one woman who believes in him is caught in the crossfire. When the man who's done everything wrong finally meets someone who sees the good in him, can he still earn redemption before it's too late? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The night air was sharp and restless, sweeping down from the Tennessee hills with the smell of wet asphalt and pine. A low rumble broke through the dark, a pack of motorcycles cutting through the mist like thunder. At the front of them rode a man called Bear. His real name was Benjamin Callahan, but no one had called him that in years. The headlight of his Harley painted streaks of light across the cracked road. Behind him, a dozen men followed in formation, the roar of their engines echoing off the trees. They were the Iron Saints, a name that made most folks in Maple Hollow lock their doors after sundown. Benjamin's face was set hard, but his eyes were tired. Tired in the way of a man who'd seen too much, done too much, and carried the weight of every mistake. His leather jacket bore patches of honor and warning. Ride hard, die free. The road had been his home since the day his wife and little boy were buried. He didn't believe in second chances anymore. He barely believed in himself. Ahead, a flickering sign appeared through the fog. Gracie's Grill, a small diner with cracked windows and a neon light that buzzed like a mosquito. The gang slowed as Benjamin lifted his hand. They parked in a line outside, engines idling before going silent one by one. The night suddenly felt too quiet. Inside, the bell over the door jingled when Benjamin pushed it open. Warm air and the smell of bacon grease met him. The place was almost empty, except for a couple of truckers finishing coffee and an old jukebox humming faintly in the corner. Behind the counter stood a young woman in a faded blue apron, wiping down tables with a rag that had seen better days. Her hair was tied back, and her cheeks were pale from exhaustion. Benjamin noticed how her hands trembled when she set down menus. She didn't look him in the eye. "Evenin'," she said softly. "You can sit anywhere." Her voice was kind but cautious, the way someone speaks when they're hoping not to be noticed too much. Benjamin and his men filled the corner, booth, leather creaking as they sat. When she brought their coffee, one of the bikers made a crude joke. She didn't answer, just poured and left. Benjamin gave the man a look that shut him up fast. He couldn't stop watching her, though. Something about her quietness, how she kept moving, no matter how tired she looked, stirred something deep in him. He hadn't cared about another person's struggle in years. But there was something about this girl, this waitress with the hollow eyes, that wouldn't let him look away. The menu was simple: fried chicken, meatloaf, mashed potatoes. When the food came, it was good, hot and filling. The gang laughed and ate loud, but Benjamin barely touched his plate. He kept glancing toward the counter, where the girl worked in silence. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. A clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. One by one, the bikers finished eating, leaving money on the table before heading outside to smoke. Benjamin stayed behind, stirring his cold coffee. He watched as the waitress, Hazel May Rivers, her name tag said, started clearing plates. She stacked them carefully, scraping leftover food into a paper bag. Not the trash. A bag. His brows furrowed. he spoke up. "What are you doing with that?" She froze mid-motion, her eyes darting to his face like a startled deer. "Oh, nothing. Just saving a bit." He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My mama's sick. My little brother's hungry most nights. I take what folks leave, just the clean stuff. It helps." She swallowed hard, then met his gaze for the first time. "May I have your leftovers?" Benjamin stared at her, and for a second, the diner disappeared. He saw flashes of another kitchen, long ago. His wife laughing over burnt pancakes, his son with syrup on his chin. The ache in his chest came fast and deep. He pushed his untouched plate toward her. "Take it," he said gruffly. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out $100 bill, and slid it under the edge of the plate. "Keep that too." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I can't take that." "You can," he said, standing up. "And you will." Before she could thank him, he walked out, the bell above the door jingling behind him. Outside, the gang was laughing beside their bikes. He didn't say a word as he climbed on and revved the engine, but his hands shook slightly on the handlebars. That night, Benjamin couldn't sleep. The roar of the road still echoed in his mind, but so did her voice. "May I have your leftovers?" The words wouldn't leave him alone. He had given money to beggars before, tossed coins into open hands. But this was different. She hadn't asked for herself. She had asked for someone else. When the clock hit 2 in the morning, Benjamin gave up on sleep. He threw on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and rode back into the dark. The diner was closed, its lights off. But he saw her, a small figure walking down the dirt road beside the woods, carrying that paper bag. He followed from a distance, his engine low, headlights off. She didn't notice. She walked for nearly half a mile until she reached a trailer at the edge of the woods. The place looked like it was barely standing, rusted siding, one window patched with cardboard. She knocked softly before going in. Through the thin walls, Benjamin saw a flicker of light. A candle, maybe. The shape of a child moved toward her. The boy hugged her waist, and she pulled out the bag, setting it on a table. They bowed their heads for a moment, maybe praying. The image hit Benjamin hard. He waited until her shadow disappeared inside, then quietly got off his bike. He went to the gas station down the road, bought groceries, milk, bread, canned beans, medicine, and came back. He placed the bag on the porch under a stack of mail and left before she could ever know. He rode aimlessly until dawn, the first light breaking through the clouds like hope trying to sneak into his heart. It had been a long time since he felt something other than anger. He didn't know what to call it, pity, maybe, or compassion. But it scared him. The next morning, Hazel woke to the sound of her brother shouting, "Mama, there's food outside!" She opened the door and froze. The paper bag sat on the porch, heavy with things she couldn't afford. Bread, milk, fresh fruit. There was even a bottle of cough syrup. Her hands shook as she brought it inside. Her mother, pale and wrapped in blankets, smiled weakly. "Someone must have heard our prayers," she said. Hazel bit her lip, tears burning behind her eyes. "Yeah," she whispered. "Maybe someone did." All morning she wondered who it was. The only person who might have known was the biker from last night, the one with eyes that looked both kind and lost. But why would a man like that care? By afternoon, she decided to find out. Benjamin sat alone in his garage that day, cleaning his tools, pretending not to care. His gang had gone out riding, but he stayed behind. He told himself it was because of the rain. The truth was, he didn't want to face their jokes. He looked around the cluttered space. Old bikes, broken engines, a single photo pinned above his workbench. a smiling boy on a little red tricycle. His son. The memory hit like a punch. He slammed the drawer shut and cursed under his breath. Then he heard the rumble of another bike outside. Mick Hammer Dalton, his second in command. "You coming or what, boss?" Mick yelled. "We're heading to the bar." Benjamin shook his head. "Not tonight." Mick frowned. "You good?" "Fine," he lied. When the noise faded, Benjamin sat in the silence. He reached for his jacket, and something fell from the pocket. Hazel's crumpled order slip from the diner. Her name was scribbled in the corner in careful handwriting. He stared at it a long time, then put it back. That evening, he rode again. The diner's lights glowed warm against the dark sky. He parked outside, trying to convince himself it was just to grab coffee. Hazel was behind the counter. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but this time she didn't look afraid. She walked over, her apron cleaner, her posture a little stronger. "Evening," she said softly. He nodded. "Coffee. Black." She poured the cup, then lingered a moment. "You left groceries at my place, didn't you?" He met her eyes. "What makes you think that?" She smiled faintly. "Because not many people ride out to the edge of town at night unless they got a reason." He shrugged. "Maybe someone just wanted to help." "Then tell that someone thank you," she said. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "You just did." Outside, rain started to fall, tapping gently against the glass. Benjamin watched her move between tables, her steps light now, her face brighter. And for the first time in years, something inside him, some small, stubborn piece of his heart, began to thaw. Rain slid down the diner windows like thin silver strings. The night crowd thinned, and the clock above the coffee pots ticked past 9. Hazel moved with quiet care, refilling cups, wiping crumbs, and pocketing the stray pencil that always rolled toward the register. She tried not to look at the corner booth where the biker leader sat alone with his coffee, but her eyes kept drifting back. He didn't seem dangerous tonight. He seemed tired. Tired in the bones, the way a man looks after carrying something heavy for too long. When the last trucker paid and left, the bell above the door jingled once, and then fell silent. Hazel turned the open sign to closed. The rain lightened, and a soft, wet smell drifted in each time the door swung. She gathered her tip jar and counted it, lips moving as she added small numbers in her head. She needed gas money for the week. She needed cough syrup for Mama. She needed bread for Eli's lunch. She tried to stretch every dollar like taffy. The biker leader, she still didn't know his real name, stood, set cash on the table, and walked the empty cup to the counter as if this were his place to clean up too. It was a small thing, but it startled her. Men like him did not bus their own dishes. "Thanks," she said, taking the cup. He nodded. "You lock up soon?" "In a minute." He glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Don't walk home alone in this," he said, tilting his head toward the thin rain and the empty lot. "I'll be fine. It's not far." "You got someone to pick you up?" "Just my own 2 feet," she said with a small smile. "They're dependable." His gaze shifted to her shoes. The soles were worn almost smooth, the right one fixed with glue that had dried in a pale line. He didn't say a word about it. He just pulled his gloves on and turned to go. Then he paused, as if he meant to add something. Maybe take care, maybe good night. But words failed him. The bell jingled, the door side shut. Hazel watched the red glow of the tail light fade into the rain. Then she finished the cash drawer, mopped the floor, and shut off the neon sign. Gracie, the owner, had gone home early with a headache, so the lockup was Hazel's job. She did it fast and well, the way she did everything. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine mist that breathed against her cheeks. She pulled her jacket tight and started down the sidewalk, past the hardware store, the barber, and the church with its white steeple and peeling paint. Her feet slapped softly on the wet pavement. The town smelled like rain and cold metal. She walked the last half-mile on the shoulder of the road, the ditch dark with weeds. In her bag, a paper-wrapped slice of meatloaf and 2 biscuits bumped against a bottle of generic cough syrup. She had bought the medicine with part of her tip jar, knowing it meant the light bill would dance close to overdue again. It was fine. They had candles. By the time she reached the trailer, the mist had turned to a slow drip from the trees. She climbed the steps and opened the door. Warmth, thin but real, met her face. The glow of a cheap lamp washed the little room in honey light. "Mama?" she called softly. "Eli? I'm home." A boy's thin legs swung off the couch. Eli ran to her, all elbows and bright eyes, hair sticking up from where he had slept. "Did you bring anything?" he asked, not greedy, just hungry. "I did," she said, setting down the bag. "A little bit of something good?" From the back room, their mother's voice floated out. "Hazel, is that you?" It was a sweet voice, tired and warm. Hazel's chest loosened an inch. Mama had more good days this week than bad ones. Not many, but some. She pulled out the food, warmed it quick in a dented pan, and split the meatloaf in 3. Eli ate with careful joy, like he didn't want to scare the meal away by moving too fast. Mama took small bites, then coughed into a folded handkerchief. Hazel poured the syrup into the tiny plastic cup that came with it and handed it over with a quiet, "Down the hatch, okay?" "Bossy," Mama said with a smile, and swallowed it like a good sport. "Mercy, that stuff tastes like a tire." "It'll help," Hazel said, rubbing her mother's back the way Mama used to do when Hazel had a cold. "We'll see the clinic next week. Pastor Dean said he could talk to the nurse about the sliding scale." Mama nodded, eyes closing for a moment. "Pastor Dean always finds a way." Eli had already finished, licking the crumbs from his fingers. "Hazel," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Did the motorcycle man come in again? The big one who left the money?" "He came in," she said, wiping the table. "He had coffee." "Did he say his name?" "No." "Is he mean?" Eli's eyes were wide, curious and a little scared, the way boys are when they meet a storm. Hazel thought of the way the man had carried his own cup to the counter, the way his eyes had softened when he told her not to walk home alone, and the way he had looked at her shoes, but not said a word. She thought of the groceries on the porch that morning and how her hands had shaken with surprise. She thought of the way he left before praise could attach itself to him. "No," she said finally. "I don't think he's mean. I think he's sad." "Sad people can be mean," Mama murmured from the couch. "Sometimes," Hazel said, "but not always." They washed the dishes in a pan to save water, listening to the soft hiss of rain on the roof. After, Eli leaned against Hazel's arm and read from a library book about a boy building a kite out of sticks. He had the kind of voice that made stories sound braver than the page. Mama dozed. The lamp hummed. Before bed, Hazel checked the envelope with their bills. Rent due on Friday, light bill due in 9 days, a note from the clinic about a copay that felt like a mountain. She slid the $100 bill into the back, behind the past due notice, where her eyes wouldn't find it every minute, and where her fingers couldn't spend it without good reason. It wasn't just money. It was a sign that someone out there had seen them and cared enough to act. She wanted to use it right. "Do we have enough for school lunch tomorrow?" Eli asked from his blanket on the couch, eyelids sinking. I'll pack you a sandwich, she said, pushing his hair off his forehead. Peanut butter and jelly. 2 cookies if you promise not to trade them for a toy car. I won't, he said solemnly, which meant he would try not to and might fail, because he loved toy cars, and because cookies had a way of jumping from one hand to the next in a second-grade lunchroom. She kissed his cheek, turned the lamp off, and lay awake a long time, listening to her family breathe. Out in the wet dark, a motorcycle rolled by without stopping. The next day dawned gray and cool, the kind of morning where your breath shows a little in the air. Hazel woke early, made the sandwich, tucked it into Eli's backpack with a folded napkin that said, "Proud of you" in blue pen, and walked him to the bus stop. On the way back, she dropped a note at the church office for Pastor Dean. Can we talk about Mama's appointment? She headed home, changed into her diner uniform, fresh apron, hair pulled back tight, and walked to Gracie's Grill by 7. Inside, the jukebox clicked on and off, as if remembering old songs. Gracie stood at the counter counting rolls of quarters, her gray hair in a bun like a little crown. "Mornin', sugar," Gracie said. "You beat me here. Again." "Couldn't sleep," Hazel said, tying her apron. "I figured I'd start the coffee." Gracie set the quarters down and reached for Hazel's hands. "You look better. Any trouble last night?" "No, ma'am." Gracie squinted, reading the truth on Hazel's face the way only older women can. "You found food on your porch, didn't you?" Hazel's mouth fell open. "How did you—" Gracie shrugged. "This town's small. Word moves like wind. Heard a bike real late. Figured one of those men had a change of heart. Happens more than folks think." She lowered her voice. "When a man looks like he's made of stone, sometimes it's just that his heart froze to keep itself from breaking. A little warmth can do a lot." Hazel swallowed the lump that rose in her throat. "It helped," she said. "It really did." Gracie smiled and slapped the counter. "Good. Now let's cut pies and pretend our coffee doesn't taste like it was brewed in a boot." They worked the morning rush like a dance. The regulars came. Old men in caps, women with quick hands and sharp eyes, high school kids with sleepy faces and long legs. Hazel moved between tables with her quiet speed, and Gracie cracked jokes that made even the grumps grin. The bell over the door sang for hours. Halfway through the morning, the door opened, and a tall man in a black hoodie stepped in, rain beads clinging to his shoulders. Hazel's chest tightened, but it wasn't the biker leader. It was Pastor Dean, early 50s, face kind, eyes that listened even when his mouth was still. "Morning," he said. "I'm ordered by the Lord in my stomach to ask for one of Gracie's cinnamon rolls, and coffee." He leaned closer to Hazel and lowered his voice. "Got your note. Nurse at the clinic can see your mama Monday, 10 o'clock. I'll drive if you like." Relief washed over her like a warm wave. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much." Pastor Dean smiled. "We'll keep walking, one step at a time." He tipped his head toward the door. "And we'll keep our eyes open for trouble. Heard the steel vultures were sniffing around the county line last night." Gracie's joke died in her throat. She shot Hazel a look that said, "Don't worry the girl," but the look came too late. Hazel felt the room tilt a fraction. "They won't bother us," Gracie said, firm as a door latch. "Hope not," Pastor Dean said. "But if they do, we remember who we are. We feed folks. We look out for each other." Hazel poured his coffee with steady hands. But the name Steel Vultures drifted like a shadow across her thoughts. Around noon, the biker leader came back. This time he removed his jacket at the door and hung it on the peg by the window, as if telling the room he would behave. He sat on a stool at the counter instead of the corner booth. Hazel approached with a pad and pen. "What can I get you?" she asked. He glanced at the chalkboard. Meatloaf sandwich, black coffee. She wrote it down. You were right about the rain, she said, nodding toward the wet street. It wasn't safe to walk. I wasn't worried about the rain, he said. His voice had a gravel edge, but the words themselves were soft. I was worried about the dark. She studied him for a beat. A white scar cut across his knuckles. A thin, pale line crossed his eyebrow. His eyes were the color of storm water and held the same restless pull. I'm fine in the dark, she said. I know the way home. He looked at her shoes again. You shouldn't have to walk on worn soles. Her cheeks warmed. Shoes don't decide how far I go, she said. I do. He nodded once, like she had said a thing worth keeping. The lunch rush swelled, and Hazel dashed between tables. Gracie handled the grill with the pride of a general. Pastor Dean helped carry plates when things got busy, and nobody was surprised by it because he always did. 3 teenagers in letter jackets tried to skip the check and found Gracie's stare more powerful than any cop's. They paid quick and left laughing. Through it all, the biker leader ate quietly, tipped well, and watched the room. Not in a hungry way, in a careful way, like he was memorizing what goodness looked like. When the rush faded, he stood to leave. He reached for his jacket, then paused and spoke without turning. Church across the street, he said. Is the pastor any good? Hazel wiped a ring of coffee off the counter. He is, not fancy, but he shows up when it matters. He nodded and slipped his arms into the jacket. That's the only kind that counts. Do you? She stopped, surprised at herself. It wasn't her business to ask, but the words were there already. Do you have a name? He hesitated, then met her eyes. Benjamin, he said, like a man stepping left when he had meant to step right. It wasn't the name she expected. It fit him better than Bear, the name she had heard the regulars use with a mix of fear and gossip. Okay, she said, as if she were agreeing to something tender and serious. Thank you for the groceries, Benjamin. A twitch of surprise crossed his face, like he'd been caught sneaking mercy through a window. He didn't deny it. He didn't claim it either. He just tugged on his gloves and said, See you around, as if he didn't want to push luck too hard by saying tomorrow. When the door closed behind him, Gracie let out a tiny breath and fanned herself with a napkin. That man walks like trouble, she muttered, and looks like an answer to a prayer no one believed anymore. Hazel watched the rain-silvered street. He's both, she said. Late afternoon fell with a soft hand. Hazel's shift ended at 4. She tied a scarf around her neck and stepped out into clean light. Across the street, Pastor Dean stood under the church portico, talking to an older man with a cane. He waved Hazel over. Tell your mom at 10 o'clock Monday, he said again. I'll bring the reliable church van, the one that smells like crayons and vacation Bible school. She laughed, promised she'd be ready, and started home. When she reached the trailer, a small cardboard box sat on the top step, wrapped in a grocery bag against the damp. She glanced left and right, heart thudding. A note lay taped to the bag. For walking. Thought they might fit. No name, no signature. Inside the box lay a pair of sturdy black work shoes, not pretty but strong, the kind you can stand in for 10 hours and still walk home. She held one in her hands, thumb tracing the stitching. The size was right. She didn't need to guess who sent them. In the living room, Mama lay propped up on pillows reading a magazine from last month. What have you got? She asked, eyes bright with the delight of surprise. Shoes? Hazel said, laughter bubbling up through her chest before she could stop it. Real new shoes. Mama clapped her hands once, soft but joyful. Try them on. Hazel slid her feet in. They fit like someone had measured her carefully while she slept. She walked across the room, grinning like a child. Eli burst in from the bedroom and whooped like they'd won the lottery. "Who sent 'em?" he asked, bouncing. "A friend," she said, the word tasting new and sweet. "A quiet one." She put the old shoes on the shelf above the door. Maybe she would patch them again and keep them for a rainy backup pair. Or maybe she would let them rest, the way you retire a worn-out tool with thanks. They ate simple. Rice and beans with a chopped tomato from a neighbor's garden and half an apple sliced thin. After supper, Hazel wrote a short note on a scrap of paper. "Thank you for the shoes. I will use them well." She wasn't sure where to leave it. He didn't seem like a man who wanted to be chased down with thanks, so she folded the note and tucked it into her Bible, planning to place it under his coffee cup some morning when the room felt quiet enough for a secret. As the sky softened toward evening, Pastor Dean knocked on the door with 2 brown bags. "Food pantry day?" he said with a grin. "I saved the good cereal." "You spoil us," Mama scolded, delighted. "Guilty." He set the bags on the table and glanced at Hazel's feet. "New shoes?" She laughed. "A gift." He nodded, looking pleased but not prying. "God's got long arms," he said, "and sometimes they look like leather jackets and loud engines." They all laughed, and it felt good, like the kind of laugh that pushes the dark back a pace. After he left, they played a slow game of dominoes and listened to the rain start up again, soft at first, then steady. Eli fell asleep on the floor halfway through a joke. Hazel carried him to the couch, tucked the blanket under his chin, and stood at the window a long moment, staring at the road. In the distance, she heard the low roll of motorcycles. More than one, the sound laid on the wind like a promise and a warning. She couldn't tell if the roar belonged to the Iron Saints or to the other gang, whose name folks said with wrinkled noses. Her chest tightened, then loosened. She had faith like a small flame cupped in her hands. The wind could try. She would cup it closer. She put the kettle on and sat with Mama, steam fogging the glass of her mug. "You like him," Mama said, not a question. Hazel shook her head, smiling. "I don't know him." "You like the way he looked at people who needed help," Mama said. "You like that you didn't feel afraid of him." Hazel let out a breath. "I like that he saw us." "That's a start," Mama said. "Seeing is the first step to loving right, and loving right is the first step to healing." They sat in a comfortable quiet. Rain filled the pause. Somewhere a dog barked and then gave up. The clock ticked over to 9. A car passed. The night settled around the trailer like a blanket someone had shaken out and laid down with care. Before bed, Hazel knelt by the couch where Eli slept and prayed in a voice barely louder than a thought. She thanked God for shoes that fit, and a pastor who showed up, and a stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore. She asked for Monday to come quick and for the clinic to have what they needed. She asked for safety over the roads and the men who rode them. She asked for hearts to soften in ways that made no sense. Out on the edge of town, a man named Benjamin sat in a dark garage with his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't drunk and a picture of a small boy taped to the wall above his workbench. He listened to the rain and to the ghosts that came with it. He thought about a girl who said she was strong in the dark, and about shoes that didn't decide how far someone went. He thought about how $100 bill felt like nothing in his fingers and like a miracle in hers. He thought about the way she said his name, like it belonged to him still. A motorcycle rumbled past his open door, the sound bouncing off the metal shelves. It wasn't one of his men. It wasn't any engine he knew. He stood and stepped to the threshold, eyes narrowing. The taillight flashed once at the far end of the street and turned away. "Steel vultures," Mick would say later, spitting the words like bad meat. But for now, Benjamin only felt the old prickle along his spine, the one that said trouble had put down a foot in his quiet and meant to leave a print. He closed the garage door and turned the deadbolt. Then he sat back at the workbench, pulled a grease-stained notepad toward him, and wrote a list in his square, careful hand. Milk, eggs, bread, soup, shoe inserts, vitamins. He added one more line, almost without noticing. Ask Pastor about clinic. He stared at the words a long time, the rain drumming a steady beat on the roof, as if calling time for a parade he hadn't planned to march in but found himself stepping toward all the same. When he finally lay down on the low cot in the corner, he didn't sleep fast. But when sleep came, it was the kind that did not clutch his throat. He dreamed, not of fire or loss, but of a small cafe with clean floors and a line of people no one else saw, each one leaving with a warm plate and a full heart, and a simple sign on the wall that said, "Grace is never wasted." Morning would come, as always, and with it more choices. For now the rain kept singing, and in the quiet spaces between the notes, a miracle began to take shape, steady as breath. The morning sun slipped through thin clouds, warm and gold, lighting up the small trailer like a blessing. Hazel woke to the smell of coffee percolating on the old stove, and her mother humming a tune she hadn't sung in months. Eli's laughter bubbled from the front porch. The sound filled the house like birdsong. "Mama, Hazel!" Eli called, voice high with excitement. "Come see!" Hazel stepped onto the porch, still tying her apron, and froze. A brown paper bag sat by the door, heavy and full. She knelt, heart thudding, and pulled it open. Inside were cans of beans, flour, sugar, 2 loaves of bread, a carton of eggs, and a fresh bottle of cough syrup. Someone had even added a jar of honey and a note that said nothing but, "Keep going." Hazel pressed her hand over her mouth. "Who could have—" Eli grinned wide. "It's him! The man from the diner. He left it for us, I know it." Her mother, standing behind them in her robe, smiled softly. "Then thank God for sending help through strangers." Hazel swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, ma'am." She carried the bag inside, putting the food away one piece at a time, her movements slow and reverent, as if each can were holy. Her mother brewed the coffee while Eli tore into a slice of fresh bread, steam still rising from its soft middle. It was simple, but it felt like a feast. When Hazel finally sat at the table, her hands were still trembling. "He didn't just give us food," she murmured. "He gave us breathing room." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Maybe he's the answer to prayers we haven't said out loud yet." That afternoon, Hazel tied her hair back and went to work. The diner felt brighter somehow. Gracie, the owner, was in rare spirits, teasing the regulars and hollering orders toward the kitchen. The bell above the door kept jingling as customers came in from the drizzle. Just before noon, the bell jingled again, and in walked Benjamin. He looked the same as always, dark jacket, quiet eyes, and that mix of strength and sorrow that made him seem larger than the room. Hazel froze for half a second, then smiled nervously. "Afternoon?" she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "You hungry today, or just here for coffee?" "Coffee," he said. Then, after a pause, "And maybe the meatloaf." She nodded, writing it down. Her hands didn't shake as much this time. Benjamin sat at the counter, eyes flicking toward the rain sliding down the window. When she set his cup down, he said quietly, "How's your family?" Hazel blinked, surprised he remembered. "Better," she said. "We're okay this week." He nodded but didn't say more. He stirred sugar into his coffee. 2 spoons, no cream. She noticed small details. His hands were scarred, but his nails were clean. He wore a chain around his wrist, dull with age. There was a faint smell of motor oil on him, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like work, like effort. When the lunch crowd thinned, Hazel leaned against the counter. "You ever fix bikes for a living?" she asked. Benjamin nodded once. "Got a garage across town. Been there a while." "Is that where you and your friends work?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. Mostly they just ride." Hazel smiled faintly. "And you?" He looked at her. Really looked. "I'm trying to do more than that." She didn't press him, though something in his tone made her heart ache. By evening, the diner had emptied. Gracie was in the back counting change. Hazel wiped down tables, humming under her breath. Benjamin finished his coffee and stood to go. He left cash on the counter again. Too much for a meal that cheap. "Hey," Hazel called as he reached the door. "You didn't have to—" He turned, and their eyes met. "Sometimes you do things you don't have to," he said quietly. "That's how you start changing." The bell above the door jingled as he left, his boots heavy on the old floorboards. Hazel stood for a long time staring at the empty counter, her chest tight with gratitude, and something she couldn't name yet. That night, Benjamin sat alone in his garage. The place smelled of oil and dust and rain. He had a stack of old photos on the workbench, his son in a baseball cap, his wife laughing with her hair caught in sunlight. He stared at them until his vision blurred. "Why her?" he muttered to himself. "Why now?" He didn't know what had made him stop at that diner weeks ago. He only knew that the girl's words, "May I have your leftovers?" had stuck to him like a prayer he couldn't shake. The garage door creaked open. Mick Hammer Dalton poked his head in, grinning. "Boss, you in here? We're hitting the road to Nashville tomorrow. Thought I'd check if you're coming or just gonna keep hiding with your wrenches." Benjamin grunted. "Not going," Mick laughed. "You? Mr. Iron Saint himself? Not riding with the boys?" Benjamin looked up slowly. "Maybe I'm tired of breaking things." Mick's grin faltered. "You're scaring me, brother. What's next? You gonna start praying?" Benjamin didn't answer. He just wiped his hands on a rag and said, "Tell the guys to stay clear of Maple Hollow. The vultures are nosing around again." Mick frowned, sobering up. "You heard that too?" "Yeah. Think they'll cause trouble?" "They always do." Mick leaned on the doorframe. "You ain't the law, Ben. Not your job to keep this town safe." Benjamin's eyes hardened. "Someone has to." Mick shook his head and left without another word. When the garage fell silent again, Benjamin sat back down. His hands were steady now, his mind clearer than it had been in years. He didn't understand why he cared about the girl or her family. But he knew this much. He couldn't walk away. 2 days later, Hazel came home from work to find a small envelope under the porch mat. Inside was a folded piece of paper that read, "For the clinic. For your mama." There were 2 crisp $50 bills tucked inside. Hazel pressed the note to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't know who he was, not really. She didn't know about the ghosts he carried, or the fights he'd walked away from. She only knew that every time he showed up, something in their little world got a little better. That night, after Eli went to bed, she sat on the porch with her mother, both wrapped in blankets. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. "You're smiling again," her mother said. "Feels like the house is lighter when you do." Hazel smiled wider. "It's just good to know people still care, even strangers." Her mother nodded slowly. "No one stays a stranger forever, not if God's got a plan in it." Hazel looked out toward the road. You think God sends bikers now? Her mother chuckled softly. Honey, God sends whoever's willing to ride. They both laughed, the sound mixing with the hum of crickets and the whisper of wind through the trees. Down the road, hidden in the shadows, Benjamin sat on his bike watching the faint glow from their trailer window. When he saw the light flicker out, he turned the key, started the engine, and drove off into the night, his heart heavier and lighter all at once. The night began quietly, too quietly for what was coming. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the streets slick and shining under the yellow diner lights. Inside Gracie's grill, Hazel wiped down the counter while the radio played a soft tune about better days. It was closing time. Only the hum of the fridge and the hiss of the coffee pot filled the air. Gracie had already gone home, complaining of her back, leaving Hazel to finish up alone. She didn't mind. The silence gave her time to think. About her mother's next clinic visit, about Eli's laughter that morning, and, though she wouldn't admit it, about the man named Benjamin, his quiet eyes, his strange kindness. She was humming to herself when the bell over the door jingled. The sound was sharp in the stillness. Hazel turned, expecting a trucker running late. Instead, 3 men in leather jackets stepped inside. Their vests read "Steel Vultures," and their eyes swept the room like knives. "Evenin', sweetheart," one said with a crooked smile. "Coffee still on?" Hazel's heart stuttered, but she nodded. Yes, sir. Just brewed a fresh pot." "Good," said another. "We like it hot." His grin didn't reach his eyes. She poured the cups, her hand steady only because she'd learned that fear made people meaner. As she set the cups down, one of the men leaned too close, the smell of beer on his breath. "You work here alone, darlin'?" She forced a small smile. "Closing soon. My boss'll be back any minute." They laughed, low and ugly. One reached for the sugar. Another turned up the radio. Hazel's pulse pounded in her ears. Then, through the window, a pair of headlights cut across the parking lot. A motorcycle's engine rumbled and went silent. Hazel's relief was instant and deep. Benjamin pushed open the door, the bell jingling again. His gaze swept the room, landing on her first, then the men. His jaw tightened. "You fellas lost?" he asked. The leader of the Vultures smirked. "Just grabbing coffee. You the welcome committee?" Benjamin stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You're not welcome here." The air thickened. Hazel's breath caught. One of the men laughed. "Look at this. Iron Saint himself playing bodyguard for a waitress." Benjamin didn't rise to the bait. He just stood there, calm but dangerous, like a storm waiting to break. "You've had your coffee," he said. "Now get gone." The leader sneered, flicking his cup over. Hot liquid splashed across the counter and Hazel's arm. She flinched with a gasp. That was enough. Benjamin moved before the others blinked. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting hard. The sound of bone popping echoed through the diner. The other 2 lunged, knocking over chairs. Hazel screamed, ducking behind the counter as fists and boots flew. Plates shattered, coffee spilled. Benjamin was fast, but there were 3 of them. One swung a chain, catching him across the shoulder. Another threw a punch that met Benjamin's jaw. He staggered but didn't fall. He grabbed a chair and swung, sending a man crashing into the jukebox. Sparks flew as the old machine died with a whine. The leader pulled a knife. "You think you're still the king, Bear?" he snarled. "You're nothing but a ghost." Benjamin's voice came low and fierce. "Maybe, but even ghosts can fight." He struck hard, knocking the blade away and pinning the man against the wall. His hands clenched around the man's collar, rage flashing in his eyes. Hazel's voice broke through the roar of blood in his ears. "Stop!" she cried. "Please don't!" Benjamin froze. The knife clattered to the floor. The man gasped for breath, fear replacing fury. Outside, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flickered through the diner windows. The vultures bolted for the door, stumbling into the lot just as 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop. Benjamin didn't move. He just stood there, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding. Hazel crept out from behind the counter, her face pale. She laid a trembling hand on his arm. "You have to stop now. It's over." He looked down at her hand, small and gentle against his rough skin. The fury drained out of him like water through a crack. Deputy Henderson burst in, gun drawn. "What happened here?" Hazel stepped forward. "They came in looking for trouble," she said quickly. "He stopped them. They were going to hurt me." Henderson's gaze flicked from her to Benjamin, to the broken chairs and shattered dishes. He holstered his weapon but didn't look convinced. "We'll sort this out downtown." Benjamin nodded, silent. He didn't resist as they cuffed him. He didn't meet Hazel's eyes either. As the deputies led him out, Hazel followed to the doorway. The rain had started again, soft but cold. "Wait," she called. Benjamin turned, rain running down his face. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you. I'm sorry." Both felt wrong. Instead, she whispered, "You didn't have to save me." He gave her a weary half-smile. "Yeah," he said, "I did." Then he was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and the night's dark hum. Hazel stood there long after the sirens faded. The diner smelled of coffee, smoke, and something else. Change, maybe. A quiet promise that even broken things could still protect what was worth saving. Benjamin sat in the cold courtroom, wrists cuffed, head bowed. The air smelled like dust and old paper. He'd been in rooms like this before, but never had the weight felt heavier. This time, someone innocent had been caught in it. Hazel. She sat quietly in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a clean dress that still looked worn at the seams. The bruises on her arm from the spilled coffee were faint now, but the memory burned in his mind. The judge, a gray-haired man with weary eyes, adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Callahan," he said, voice calm but stern, "you have a record that could fill a filing cabinet. Assault, public disturbance, reckless behavior. And now this." Benjamin didn't speak. He didn't need to. He already knew how this would go. Then Hazel stood. Her voice trembled but held firm. "Your Honor, he saved my life." The judge looked at her with mild surprise. "You're the waitress?" "Yes, sir. Those men would have hurt me. He stopped them." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The district attorney frowned but said nothing. Hazel went on. "He didn't start the fight. He ended it. And then he stopped when I asked him to. That has to mean something." The judge leaned back, studying Benjamin. "Is that true?" Benjamin nodded once. "Yes, sir." Silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, the judge sighed. "Mr. Callahan, I ought to send you back to county for 6 months, but I'm tired of seeing the same faces in this courtroom, learning nothing." He glanced at Hazel, then back at Benjamin. "So I'll try something different." The gavel struck. "Community service, 200 hours, under supervision of Pastor Dean Whitmore at the Maple Hollow Mission." Benjamin blinked, unsure he'd heard right. Hazel covered her mouth, trying not to smile in relief. The judge continued. "You will help repair public property and serve meals to the needy. You will check in weekly. Fail to do so, and I'll make sure your next stop has bars and no windows. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Benjamin said quietly. As he was led out, Hazel caught his eye. For the first time, he saw something in her expression that felt like forgiveness, and worse, something he didn't think he deserved. Faith. The next morning, Benjamin stood outside the mission on Main Street. The building was old brick, the sign faded but proud. Maple Hollow Community Mission. All are welcome. Inside, laughter and clattering dishes mixed with the smell of stew. Pastor Dean met him at the door. The man was tall, gentle-faced, with a voice like calm water. "Benjamin Callahan," he said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've been expecting you." "Court sent me," Benjamin muttered. "Court might have sent you," the pastor said with a knowing smile. "But maybe someone else did too." Benjamin didn't answer. Dean led him to a side room filled with tools and paint cans. "We're repairing the back hall," he said, "and when you're done, we could use help delivering food to the shut-ins." Benjamin picked up a hammer, the weight familiar in his hand. "Guess I'll start here." Days passed. He worked quietly, patching walls, mending doors, cleaning up the lot behind the mission. The townsfolk watched from a distance, unsure what to think. But Hazel stopped by every afternoon with coffee and sandwiches. "You don't have to bring that," he told her one day. "I know," she said, "but you probably forget to eat." He couldn't argue with that. They worked side by side sometimes, her scrubbing tables, him fixing broken hinges. Slowly, the silence between them grew comfortable. Hazel's laughter started to draw out his own, low and rough but real. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Pastor Dean stood by the doorway and watched them. "You see, Benjamin," he said, "the thing about redemption is it doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in small, steady ones." Benjamin looked at the clean wall he'd just painted, and then at Hazel's smile across the room. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something instead of breaking it. That night, when he rode home, the wind didn't sting quite as much. He didn't know what came next. But for once, the road ahead didn't look empty. Benjamin arrived at the mission every morning just after sunrise. The air smelled of dew and coffee, and birds sang in the churchyard as he parked his bike. At first, the work felt like punishment, painting fences, hauling crates, fixing leaky faucets. But slowly, it began to feel like something else. Purpose. Pastor Dean didn't hover or lecture. He gave Benjamin space to work, to think. "Redemption isn't a sermon," the pastor said once. "It's what happens when your hands learn mercy." The mission was always busy. Mothers brought children for free meals, men looking for work came for sandwiches, and older folks stopped by just to talk. Benjamin watched them come and go, noticing things he hadn't cared about before, the gratitude in their eyes, the way people smiled through hardship. One morning, Hazel appeared with a paper bag of biscuits. "You look like you skipped breakfast," she said. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm not big on mornings." "You're not big on talking either," she teased. He gave a small, reluctant grin. "I talk when I've got something worth saying." She laughed softly. "Then I'll wait." They ate together on the back steps, watching kids chase each other in the churchyard. Hazel told him about her mother's appointment, how Pastor Dean had driven them, and how the nurse had given them medicine for free. "It's like the town starting to breathe again," she said. Benjamin nodded. "Maybe it just needed a little fixing." "Like the walls?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Like the walls." By the second week, Benjamin began helping in the kitchen. At first, the older volunteers eyed him with suspicion, whispering behind his back. But when the oven broke down, he fixed it in an hour. When a delivery truck got stuck in mud, he hauled it out with his bike and a rope. Little by little, the whispers turned to nods of respect. Pastor Dean noticed. "Seems like the town's learning from you," he said one afternoon. Benjamin shook his head. "They're learning I ain't as mean as I look." The pastor smiled. "That's a start. In the evenings, when most had gone home, Benjamin stayed to clean the tool shed or repair broken chairs. Hazel often lingered too, sweeping floors or wiping tables. They talked more now, about small things, safe things. "Eli wants to meet you," she said one night. He paused mid-sweep. "Why?" "He says you sound like one of those heroes in his books, the ones who ride around helping people." Benjamin's mouth twitched. "I'm no hero?" "Maybe not," she said gently, "but you're helping people." He didn't answer, but the words stayed with him. Saturday brought heavy rain. A leak opened in the mission roof, dripping onto the hallway floor. Benjamin climbed up with a hammer and tarp, Hazel holding the ladder steady below. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he didn't stop. "Careful," she called as thunder cracked nearby. He grinned down. "You worried about me now?" "Maybe a little." He nailed the last corner, water splashing his boots. When he climbed down, Hazel handed him a towel. Their fingers brushed, just a small thing, but it sent warmth through both of them. Inside, Pastor Dean handed out hot cocoa to anyone still working. "Storms come and go," he said, "but folks who stick together, those are the ones who rebuild after." Benjamin didn't say anything, but he glanced at Hazel, and she smiled like she understood. That night, he sat in the mission's small chapel after everyone left. Rain tapped the roof, soft and steady. For the first time in years, he prayed, not with fancy words, just a few honest ones. "God, if you're real, show me how to do this right." He didn't expect an answer, but somehow the silence felt different, gentle instead of empty. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled through clean windows, shining on the fresh paint Benjamin had rolled onto the walls. The mission looked brighter, alive again. Hazel arrived early with fresh bread and a shy smile. "Smells like hope in here," she said. Benjamin chuckled. "Hope and paint thinner." She laughed, and for a moment the world felt new. By the time April rolled in, the mission no longer looked tired. The walls shone with fresh paint, the flower beds bloomed with color, and laughter spilled out of the kitchen every afternoon. Word spread fast. The biker was helping the church. At first, townsfolk didn't believe it. But when they saw Benjamin fixing fences for widows, delivering groceries to shut-ins, and even teaching local kids how to patch bike tires, opinions began to shift. The same man who once made people cross the street was now being offered lemonade on porches. Hazel saw it happen bit by bit, like thawed snow melting into rivers of kindness. Every act of good made the town braver about caring again. One woman who used to whisper about those bikers started baking pies for the mission dinners. A mechanic offered free oil changes for single mothers. It was as if Benjamin's quiet change had woken up something the whole town had forgotten: decency. Pastor Dean watched it unfold with joy. "Redemption's contagious," he told Benjamin one morning as they stacked lumber behind the mission. Benjamin smiled faintly. "Guess I'm spreading the right kind of trouble then." He didn't see himself as a hero, but he started to feel lighter. The anger that once lived inside him had grown smaller, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or forgiveness trying to take root. That Sunday, Pastor Dean invited him to attend the service. Benjamin sat in the back pew, arms crossed, feeling out of place among the hymn books and soft voices. Hazel sat a few rows ahead, glancing back with a smile that told him it was okay to stay. When the choir sang Amazing Grace, Benjamin's throat tightened. The line, "I once was lost but now am found," hit him like a truth he'd been running from. He didn't sing, but he listened. And that was enough. Afterward, Hazel caught him by the steps. "You stayed the whole time," she said, surprised. He shrugged. Didn't want to be rude. You didn't have to stay, she said softly. But I'm glad you did. He looked down, scratching his scarred hand. You ever feel like maybe God's still mad at you? Hazel shook her head. No, I think he's just waiting for us to stop being mad at ourselves. Her words stayed with him long after she walked away. That evening, he sat outside the mission, watching the sunset turn the sky gold. The Iron Saints rode by in the distance, waving as they passed. He waved back. Some of them had started volunteering too. Painting, hauling food, helping with repairs. Even the roughest men found something good to do when given a reason. The town that once feared them now greeted them by name. And for the first time in years, Benjamin Callahan felt like he belonged somewhere again. Snow drifted down in soft flakes as Christmas Eve arrived in Maple Hollow. The mission buzzed with warmth and laughter, the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon filling the air. Benjamin had sold a few old bike parts to buy food for the dinner. He didn't tell anyone. It was enough to see people fed. Hazel helped set the tables with her brother and mother, candles flickering beside folded napkins. Pastor Dean moved through the crowd, shaking hands and smiling wide. The townsfolk came together. Farmers, bikers, waitresses, old widows, all sharing one room, one meal, one piece. When everyone sat down, Benjamin stood quietly by the kitchen door, serving plates one by one. Hazel watched him, her heart full. When he finally sat across from her, she pushed her plate toward him and said playfully, "May I have your leftovers?" The room laughed softly, and Benjamin smiled, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. For a moment, everything felt right. But outside, unseen through the frosted window, a faint orange glow flickered in the distance, the direction of Benjamin's motorcycle shop. Moments later, a man burst through the mission door, face pale. "Fire!" he shouted. "The garage! It's burning!" Benjamin froze, the warmth of the evening vanishing in an instant. Hazel reached for his hand, but he was already running for the door. Christmas lights twinkled behind him as he disappeared into the night, toward smoke and sirens. By the time Benjamin reached the shop, flames clawed high into the sky. The smell of smoke stung his throat as he stumbled through the snow, shouting for his men. Sirens wailed in the distance, but it was too late. The garage, his one honest thing, was gone. He found Mick kneeling in the snow, coughing black soot. "They came out of nowhere," Mick rasped. "Steel vultures. Said you forgot where you came from." Benjamin clenched his fists, grief and rage twisting together. "Anyone hurt?" "Just me," Mick said, wincing. "But they left a message." He held up a charred scrap of leather. Iron Saints burned halfway through. When the firefighters arrived, townsfolk gathered, whispering. Some pitied him, others didn't. "He probably did it himself," someone muttered, "for insurance." Benjamin heard. It all but said nothing. Smoke and shame filled his lungs. By morning, the news spread fast. Hazel came running to the ruins, coat buttoned crooked, eyes wide. "You didn't do this," she said fiercely. "I know you didn't." He couldn't meet her gaze. "Doesn't matter what's true," he said. "People see what they want." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Don't walk away, not now." But he was already turning toward his bike, shoulders heavy. Sometimes you can't fight what folks believe. Then he rode off into the gray morning, leaving Hazel standing in the snow, watching the smoke fade into the clouds. 3 days after the fire, winter roared through Maple Hollow like a wild beast. The snow came hard, blinding and cold. Hazel hadn't slept more than an hour each night. Benjamin hadn't come back, and no one had seen him since. She bundled in her coat, climbed into Pastor Dean's old truck, and drove through the storm. "He's out there," she said, her voice shaking, "and he's not okay." The roads were slick, lined with white drifts. She checked the old highways, the diner, even the bridge where he liked to park and watch the river. Nothing. The town lights vanished behind her as she pressed on. Finally, near the edge of town, she saw a dark shape slumped against the burned shell of the garage. Her heart stopped. It was him. Benjamin sat in the snow, head bowed, his hands blue from cold. His bike lay tipped over beside him. "Benjamin!" she cried, stumbling toward him. He stirred weakly, voice hoarse. "Should have stayed gone, Hazel." "Not a chance," she said, wrapping her coat around him. "You're not dying here." He tried to argue, but his strength failed. She hauled him up, trembling from the weight, and half dragged, half carried him into the truck. As she drove him home through the blizzard, she whispered, "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." Outside, snow swallowed the road, but Hazel didn't slow down. Benjamin woke to the smell of soup and the sound of soft rain. Hazel sat beside him, eyes tired but kind. He tried to sit up, but she pressed a hand to his chest. "Rest," she said. "You're safe." For a long moment he stared at her, confusion and gratitude tangled in his chest. "Why'd you do this for me?" "Because you gave me hope when I had none," she whispered. "Now let me give it back." Over the next few days, he grew stronger. The town, hearing what she'd done, sent food and blankets. Even Pastor Dean stopped by with plans for rebuilding the diner. Benjamin looked around the small trailer, her family laughing, the smell of bread baking, and felt something he hadn't in years. Home. Spring returned to Maple Hollow with bird song and sunlight. The air smelled of new paint and baking bread. Where the old diner once stood now shone a new sign. The Leftovers Cafe, because grace is never wasted. Benjamin stood outside, wiping his hands on a clean apron. The townsfolk gathered for the grand opening, bikers, farmers, teachers, and widows alike. Hazel stood beside him, her eyes bright with pride. Her mother worked the register, and Eli darted between tables, carrying plates bigger than his arms. When the doors opened, people flooded in, laughter echoing through the cafe. For every meal bought, one was given free to someone in need. No one left hungry, not even in spirit. As evening fell, Benjamin and Hazel stepped outside to breathe. The sign's soft glow reflected in her eyes. "You did this," Hazel said. He shook his head. "We did." She smiled, slipping her hand into his. Funny how leftovers can turn into miracles. He chuckled quietly. Guess God knew what he was doing after all. Later, down by the river, Pastor Dean baptized Benjamin in the cool, clear water. The Iron Saints stood along the bank, hats off, silent and still. When Benjamin rose, Hazel was there, tears shining on her cheeks. He looked at her and said softly, "May I have your leftovers?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Not this time. We're sharing everything from now on." And under the golden light of sunset, laughter and grace filled the air like music. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.